Welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day, and we are going to be giving some predictions for the upcoming series in the second round. We already talked about the Knicks, Pacers, Nuggets, Timberwolves series on Friday, but we finally have an updated playoff picture with the games from this past weekend, so we're going to be diving into Celtics, Cavaliers, and Thunder Magic. Starting in the Eastern Conference with Boston and Cleveland, Celtics are massive favorites in this series. According to DraftKings, they are minus 1,200, and the Cavs are plus 800. The keys, especially for Cleveland, if they do want to make this a series, is can the others outside of Donovan Mitchell step up offensively? And we know that how great Donovan Mitchell closed out that series against the Magic. The Celtics, though, do have a ton of different options to throw at Donovan Mitchell if he is going to be the one-man army, where they have the pair of, potential All-NBA defensive candidates in Derek White and Drew Holiday, both in the backcourt. They can put length on him as well if they want to go with a Jaylen Brown or a Jason Tatum. Even I think some of their bench options, call me crazy, Sam Hauser is a decent defender that I definitely wouldn't want him to be the number one option for guarding Donovan Mitchell, but I just feel like they can throw a whole bunch of different looks at Mitchell, and can the others sort of step up to the plate and actually give them some real consistent production, because consistency hasn't necessarily been the number one thing for the Cavs really all season. Jarrett Allen, it's going to be interesting whether or not he's able to play, because he does feel like he's one of the more consistent players on that Cleveland roster, but dealt with the rib injury to finish off the final few games of that series against Orlando. We saw Darius Garland, we talked about this earlier in the show, averaged just 15 points and 5 assists, both numbers down, of course, from the regular season. And, Garland, he was dealing with, I think it was a jaw injury during the course of the regular season. He missed all that time when Mitchell actually helped catapult the Cavs to that massive run there in, January, February, somewhere around that time, mid-season. And was dealing with that, plus the fact that I do feel like Mitchell, in order to fully get himself going, does need to be slightly more ball dominant, and he's been incredible in the postseason, so you can't necessarily take the ball away from him in these instances, but at the same time, they need other players to be able to make an impact, and even if that is with Mitchell with the ball, what other types of looks can JB Bickerstaff and this Cleveland group throw out in order to create some better looks moving without the ball, where that hasn't necessarily been the strong suit of Darius Garland or Donovan Mitchell through the first parts of their career. And I feel like for Bickerstaff, he had to win that Magic series in order to keep his job. I feel like if they are competitive against the Celtics in this series, he'll hang on, but there is definitely a chance. I mean, I think that the most likely situation is the Cavs end up making some type of a move this offseason. I don't feel like they think that they can just run it back fully. And I guess I'll finish out here with the preview before I dive into that. One of the other keys, though, sort of on the note of Jarrett Allen, is the fact that they need to take advantage of the fact that the Celtics are without Kristaps Porzingis right now. Not sure when Allen is going to return, and this Celtics team is inherently pretty tall, but they lose a lot of that top-end height with Porzingis out of the game. They're going to be starting a 37-year-old Al Horford in his place, who was solid against the Heat, but at the same time, the Heat didn't necessarily have the size either to try and make the Celtics pay, and I feel like one of the areas that the Celtics have been most vulnerable this season is on the glass at times, and the Cavaliers, in theory, should definitely be a great rebounding team and have the potential to do so against the Celtics. Can you get second chance points? Can you out-physical the Celtics? Now, it's going to be interesting once Allen does come back, as we've seen this sort of dynamic between him and Evan Mobley hasn't been the prettiest from an offensive perspective. Are they going to sort of balance the minutes they actually play together? Where is that spacing going to come from? They need Strus absolutely to step up in this type of a series, but who else are going to be the players that can actually contribute? Because, the Celtics can play both offense and defense. It seems like if this is going to be the case, they can't necessarily just, run. I don't think the Cavaliers can bank on I don't want to call it incompetency, but call it at least the lackluster set of players on the other end from an offensive perspective, at least if you want to talk about the Orlando Magic and sort of winning out in some of these ugly games. I don't think that that's what this series is necessarily going to be, and they're going to need some of these other players to step up for them. Again, I called him out, I guess, a little bit. I wasn't trying to call him out like that, but Marcus Morris was playing closing minutes for them. So, and this was in Game 6. So, the Bickerstaff and this Cavs team is definitely still trying to work itself out in a lot of ways, and I guess we'll just see how they are able to put it together. But I do think the Celtics win this series. I don't think it's going to be, ultra competitive. As a Celtics fan, admittedly, I was actually hoping that the Cavaliers would be the Celtics matchup. I feel like the Magic at least sort of have an identity, and the Celtics should beat either one of these teams, and the Porzingis being out factor does sort of play into this, which makes me maybe a little bit more nervous, but at the same time, I just feel like the Magic would have been a very bruising team that would have been a tough second round out for the Celtics in terms of sort of, putting miles on some of these players for the Celtics. I just don't know if I see it with the Cavs. Obviously, during the regular season, the highlight of this type of a matchup was the Dean Wade game where he came off the bench and went berserk. Wade is dealing with an injury right now. They get him back, maybe, I shudder a little bit more at the idea of it, but I'm going to go with the Celtics in 5 in this series. And then moving on to the Western Conference here, we have the Thunder and the Mavericks. Thunder are slight favorites in this series, according to DraftKings again, minus 115 favorites. The Thunder are minus 115. The Mavericks are minus 105, so very contested series in the eyes of Vegas for this. I think the keys are going to be whether or not the Mavericks can hold up from that same defensive perspective. They were incredible during the series against the Clippers, held them to just over 100 points per game. They took Harden and Paul George out of it for the most part, other than that Game 5 win, I believe it was, where it was just a super ugly first quarter. They ended up battling back. Paul George hit some super tough shots down the stretch of that game. But I think that the Clippers are a lot more flawed than the Thunder are. And, obviously the Kawhi factor played a big role in what the Clippers actually did look like by the time that the postseason came around. But with the Thunder, I think that they are super deep. And I think that they can sort of have a number of different guys hurt you. Now, it's not necessarily the same level of isolation ball because I don't know. I mean, Shea, I'm probably being disrespectful even saying that Shea isn't necessarily an ISO scorer. I don't view him that way in terms of being a ball stopper, but he can absolutely take just about anybody off the dribble himself. So, it's going to be interesting to see who's going to be that point of attack defender for Dallas. We also have the fact that Maxi Kleber, like I mentioned earlier in the show, he is going to be out indefinitely with that separated shoulder. I think that is a big time deal because you look at the Thunder, who are one of the best 3-point shooting teams in the NBA. Kleber provided a level of spacing that was massive for them. Now, I don't know if necessarily the Mavericks were going to be able to run that double big lineup quite as much as they were against the Clippers because of spacing purposes on the defensive end and having some of these big men maybe get out on the perimeter a little bit more. But still, I feel like what I've liked about the Mavericks so much is the fact that they are able to throw out all of these different looks, and they can play big when they want to. They can play small a little bit when they put Kleber at the 5, and I feel like some of those bench minutes when Chet Holmgren isn't on the court, I thought that was maybe going to be an option for them to run. And we saw them close out some of the early games with Kleber at the 5, and it was working for them. So I thought that was going to be a little bit more of the route that they go with, but this is definitely a big loss for them, and I do think plays a big-time role in this. Going to be super curious to see how this all plays out. I think it should be a really good series. Obviously, Vegas does too. This is also going to be a game that definitely the whole idea of playoff experience and how valuable is that is going to come into conversation because of the fact that everybody thought that this was a year too early for the Thunder, that they weren't necessarily going to be ready, and they end up steamrolling the Pelicans. Now, that being said, Pelicans obviously without Zion Williamson, I think he plays that series that is definitely more competitive, but this is a Thunder team that has showed us they were great all season long, and yet they have still had their share of doubters in this postseason. Shannon Sharp called them the worst 1 seed ever, which I feel like he's got to be regretting a little bit up to this point. But, I'm really excited for this series. Again, a fully bought-in Kyrie Irving is something that I absolutely want to watch. Also, what is Luka Doncic going to look like? The Thunder are one of the more underrated defenses in the league. I think that this could be, I don't want to say a defensive chess match, but I feel like both of these teams could end up having to rely on a level of difficult shots, which both Shea and Luka Doncic, throw Kyrie in there as well. They're both definitely capable of making, but the Thunder were a top 5 defense for most of the year. Post All-Star break, specifically in April, we saw the Dallas Mavericks with the 6th best defensive rating in the NBA. So both teams can play two-way. I think we're going to have some awesome individual moments with some of these players where Shea, Luka, Kyrie, any one of them is capable of putting together a highlight reel moment at any given time. So it should be really exciting to see. I do have the Thunder in 6 in this one. I think that, again, the level of depth, the level of shooting, and just, efficiency, the Mavericks have been very much leaning on that defense, which is great, but they were playing a Clippers team that wasn't necessarily, a well-oiled machine offensively towards the end of the year. Now, the Thunder also beat up on an undermanned Pelicans team, so I definitely don't want to make it seem like I'm just basing this off of the first round series, but I think that the Thunder are just the more talented team as a whole. Now, the Mavericks have the best player in the series. Is he going to show up? Because, again, it's not that Luka was bad necessarily, but efficiency numbers definitely weren't there for him the way that they would have wanted. Shot 41, 24 shooting splits, and he's just flat out going to need to be better if they're going to have a chance in this one. I don't know if the Mavericks necessarily have the size to take advantage of the Thunder in this series. Now, Thunder, another team that can definitely struggle with rebounding. We see some of these second efforts from Lively and Gafford. That is going to be another sort of key thing to watch as well. But I'm going to go with the Thunder in 6. Let me know what your thoughts on this series are. But that is all we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning in to the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. We are live every 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern on weekdays, so definitely be sure to check us out tomorrow. Follow us on social media for more exclusive short content as well. But thank you very much for tuning in, and we will see you tomorrow. Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great.